The Decision. Antimatter Society. Episode 3. The transmission from Drevn arrived on the morning of the 7th day, which was exactly when it should have arrived. Sorel had learned in his years at the Fold Station not to read anything into timing. A transmission that arrived early meant the previous one had taken slightly longer. A transmission that arrived late meant the opposite. The fold was consistent. It was the counting that created the illusion of variance. He read it twice, which was also what he had learned to do. The first reading was for content. Drevn had forwarded the latest survey data from the outer systems, routine observations, the kind that accumulated in both directions without requiring response. He had included a note about the calibration variance they had discussed 3 transmissions ago, which had resolved itself without intervention. And then, at the end, which was where Drevn tended to put things he was uncertain about grazing, a question about the vote.
I understand it is scheduled for the 2nd week of your next month. I don't know the right way to ask what I am asking, so I will ask it directly. Is it going well?
The second reading was for what wasn't there. Is it going well? A short phrase that Drevn had probably written and rewritten several times. The question it was actually asking was something closer to, what do people say about us in that chamber? Do they trust us? Do they believe what we tell them about our intentions? And underneath that, something Drevn had probably not let himself fully articulate. Are we going to be chosen for this? Sorel knew Drevn well enough to know this. He had spent 5 years learning to read what arrived against what was sent, and in those 5 years had built something that was almost a friendship with a person he had never met and could never meet. There was real content in the correspondence, scientific work, genuine exchange, the kind of accumulated understanding that came from sustained attention to a single mind over time. There was also always a gap, a phrase that landed differently than intended. A question reconstructed from what the words implied rather than what they said. He had learned to work within that gap, to read twice and send carefully, to hold his interpretations lightly. He had also learned that the gap never closed, regardless of effort. It was not a problem to be solved. It was the medium. He set the transmission down and looked out through the observation panel at the fold. From the station it appeared as nothing, a quality of the dark between stars, a region where the void seemed to have a different texture than the space around it. The instruments had better ways of seeing it. To Sorel's eye, it was simply the direction from which Drevn's words arrived. Centuries ago, this was where everything had started. The matter civilization had been broadcasting outward, signals aimed at what they believed was empty space. The particular behavior of a young civilization that had not yet stopped hoping. The antimatter astronomers had detected those signals crossing the void, traced them back, and found the fold, a natural structure in space-time that reduced the crossing from millions of years to days. The matter civilization had not known anyone could hear them. They had been speaking into silence for a long time before a reply came. He thought about the joint crossing, as he sometimes did when he looked at the fold. 2 ships, one from each side, crossing simultaneously into the other's void. Meeting in the dark between the 2 galaxies, in the region where neither side could survive for long. The distance maintained between them. Close enough to see hull markings, too close to touch. The transmissions exchanged across those kilometers. The other's galaxy visible on the horizon and unreachable. Both ships had returned before their shielding failed. The documentation was in the station archive, and Sorel had read it several times. The measurements, the observations, the careful language of people describing something for which no language had yet existed. They had proven, empirically, what the physics had already predicted. You could reach the void. You could see the other galaxy from outside it. You could not enter it. The barrier was not circumstance. It was the nature of what each side was made of. He picked up his stylus and began composing his reply. He thought about what to say. The vote was proceeding in the sense that the majority position had been clear from the opening sessions. The arguments for the project were strong. The dissenting position existed but had not gathered significant support. He had attended 3 preliminary sessions by transmission before his homeworld journey, and his reading was that the outcome was not in serious doubt. What Drevn was actually asking was whether his civilization would be found adequate.
The preliminary sessions have been constructive. The arguments in favor of the project are strong, and the scientific case has held up well under examination. I travel to the homeworld for the final session next week. I think you know what I expect the outcome to be.
He read it back. Something in the last sentence might land as evasion rather than assurance. He rewrote it twice and returned to something close to the original. The difficulty was not the words. The difficulty was that what he wanted to convey was something like, "I have known you for 5 years and I trust you, and that trust is not nothing." And there was no version of that which arrived exactly as sent. You could only ever send a description of yourself, and from the description the other person built the closest version of you they could. Over 5 years and with care, that version had become detailed and reliable. It was still a version. He did not know what to make of that when applied to a project proposing to send not messages but people. He sent it. It would reach Drevn's station in 3 days. Drevn's reply would arrive 3 days after that. By then, the vote would already be done. The transit from the Fold station took 11 days. Sorel spent most of it reviewing the preliminary session transcripts and arrived knowing what he expected to find. The homeworld was older than the Fold station in the way a river delta was older than its source, not in years but in accumulated weight. The streets had been walked for enough generations that the paving stones wore smooth in the center. The administrative buildings had that quality of structures that had outlasted every revision made to them, the original architecture still legible beneath several centuries of modification. Sorel, who had spent most of his career at the Fold station with its functional angles and practical silences, found the homeworld slightly overwhelming in a way he had not anticipated. It was too complete. It had become what it was going to be, and it knew this about itself. The debate chamber held several hundred delegates. Sorel found a seat near the rear. He was there to vote, not to speak. There were better speakers than him. People who understood the large political shapes of the question in ways that years at the Fold station, with its particular and narrow perspective, perhaps made harder to see. The case for the project was made methodically over 2 sessions. The decades of dialogue that had led to this point. The alignment of both civilizations around the same curiosity. What would our people become, grown from our genome in a universe governed by different physics? The matter civilization's willingness to undertake the physical work, the colony search, the terraforming, the caretaking, the eventual withdrawal, once the replica was self-sufficient. The Fold station's role as the transmission hub for everything the replica would eventually receive. Each stage laid out in sequence, each dependent on the one before it. One of the engineers who had worked on the genome encoding problem spoke on the second morning. She described what the encoding required, the genome translated into electromagnetic signals, retranslated by the matter civilization scientists into matter-universe biochemistry. Every step involved approximation. The 2 universes were not the same at the level of fundamental physics, and the same blueprint in different conditions produced a different building. The engineers had mapped the categories of divergence as precisely as the science allowed, but some specifics were not predictable. The people on the other side would experience things close to what the genome had been built for, not wrong, not broken, close. What struck Sorel was the engineer's equanimity. She was describing unavoidable imperfection in work she had given years of her life to, and she named it plainly as a known quantity. The people on the other side would not face the same reckoning. They would have no reference. Whatever was different about their world would simply be the texture of it, the way things were. The dissenter spoke near the end of the second session. She was not angry, not performing distress, just careful, in the manner of someone who had thought about something for a long time and was not expecting to change any minds, only to ensure the record contained what it should.
We are settled. We have governed ourselves well for a long time. We have found ways to resolve the problems that civilizations are built to resolve. The matter civilization has done the same, by their account and by our observation. We trust them. We have reason to.
She paused.
Civilizations change. We are making a permanent decision based on a temporary condition. The people we create will exist in a universe we cannot enter, on a world the matter civilization built, dependent on the continuity of a relationship between our two civilizations that has existed for decades and will need to endure for centuries. If that relationship shifts, not through malice, not through conflict necessarily, but through the ordinary change that all civilizations undergo with time, we cannot protect them, we cannot reach them, we cannot intervene. We will have placed our people permanently inside another civilization's future and called it a gift.
She sat down. The chamber was quiet. Sorel sat with it. He knew Drevn. He trusted Drevn. His judgment, his good faith, his genuine curiosity about the project, his care in correspondence. He also knew that Drevn was one person in one generation of a civilization that would continue long after both of them were gone. Whatever the matter, civilization looked like in 300 years, Drevn would not be there to speak for it. He had never been in the same room as Drevn. He voted yes. The measure passed by a substantial margin. Walking out of the chamber afterward, Sorel found he was not thinking about the decision itself, but about the dissenter's specific words. A permanent decision based on a temporary condition. He turned them over through the settled streets of the homeworld, through the transit to the departure point, through the journey back to the fold station. He did not think she was right. He had voted yes, and he meant it. He thought she had named something true, which was different from being right. A fragility that was real even if it was not decisive. He carried it with him in the way he carried things he could not resolve, not as doubt, but as what the situation actually was. The station was quiet when he returned. The night cycle arrays were running their calibration sequence. His colleague Veth had left a summary on the main console, nothing urgent, a routine calibration note, the standard log of transmissions received and queued. On his desk was a delivery from the homeworld that had arrived while he was in transit. He recognized the classification markings before he opened it, archive content, designated for transmission preparation. He had expected it. The project was authorized now. The content would begin arriving. He opened it. Agricultural documentation, mostly. Crop rotation systems. Soil preparation for different terrain types. Water management across seasonal variation. The practical foundations of feeding a civilization, organized into a transmission sequence by the project committee. There were other sections, linguistic records, cultural documentation, foundational sciences, but the agricultural content was the largest. Someone had determined that before anything else, the replica would need to know how to eat. He read through the first section for a while, making notes on transmission format and scheduling. The work was familiar. What was unfamiliar was the destination. This content would not go to Drevn's station for dialogue between two civilizations who could respond to each other. It would eventually go to a world that did not yet exist, received by people who had not yet been born, in a language currently being prepared for matter-universe biology to carry. He set the documents down and thought about what the station would need to become. The genome encoding project had to begin in earnest. The most precise transmission the fold station had ever been asked to handle, years of careful work to compress antimatter biology into a signal that matter-universe scientists could receive and build from. The archive preparation was years more. Coordination with the matter, civilization on the colony search, the terraforming timeline, the handover. And then, eventually, the shift from the dialogue that had defined the station's years of operation to something else entirely. A sustained broadcast toward people who would read his words more than a year after he sent them, who could not clarify, could not press back, could not ask him to say it differently. He would send, and they would receive, and that would be the shape of it. He thought about how long this would take. The colony search alone was years. The terraforming was more. The first replica grown and raised by matter civilization caretakers who did not share their culture, who would do their best and carry their own civilization into it anyway, because that was what people did. The withdrawal once the agreed conditions were met. The first transmissions arriving on the other side, received by people who had never heard from this station before and would hear from it regularly for the rest of their lives. He would not see most of this. He was not starting a project with an end he could reach. He was starting a process. There was a difference. He thought about what the people on the other side would have. A genome approximated at every step by scientists who had named the categories of divergence without being able to name the specifics. A sun they would understand as the sun, the only one they had ever known, though it would not be the sun the genome had been built for. A world with tides which would simply be what the sea did. Matter civilization caretakers in the early years who did not share their culture, followed by withdrawal, followed by the archive and the transmissions from this station and whatever the replica had already become in the years of being raised. After that, his words, arriving more than a year after he sent them. Whatever he transmitted would be the most current thing they had from their origins, and it would already be history by the time it arrived. They would learn to eat from the documents on his desk. They would learn what they were from descriptions of what someone else had been. And they would become something shaped by what he sent and by what the matter universe made of it and by whatever they chose to do with both. That was part of what had been decided tonight, not just to create them, but to release them into a future no one here could see. He thought about the engineer's equanimity. He thought about the dissenter's words one last time. Then he set both down, in the way you set down things you have finished carrying for the evening, and opened the outgoing transmission log. He entered the header fields. Gate. Origin. Destination. The same fields he had entered 1,000 times. He thought about Drevn reading this in 3 days, setting down whatever he was working on, understanding what it meant for everything that came next. He typed 3 words into the body.
We voted yes.
He sent it.